Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for waiting. Welcome to the Odontoprev conference call to discuss the earnings of the second quarter and first half of 2022. I am Stella Hong, IR Supervisor, and today we have with us Mr. Rodrigo Bacelar, CEO, and Jose Roberto Pacheco, CFO and IR Officer. This video conference is being recorded and streamed on the web. The link is available at the company IR website at ri.odontoprev.com.br, where the respective presentation is also available, or on the company's YouTube channel. This video conference has simultaneous translation. To use, click on the interpretation button, the globe icon at the bottom right of your screen, and choose the preferred language, Portuguese or English. You may also click on mute original audio. Next, we'll start the Q&A session. To enter the queue, your name and company must be included via the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. The questions will be answered in the order they are received, and when announced, a pop-up to unmute your microphone will appear on the screen. We suggest that your questions be asked all at once. It's important to note that submitting questions is only allowed for participants on the webcast platform. The aforementioned instructions are also available in the chat, as well as the presentation of this webcast. Before proceeding, let me mention that statements made during the call relating to the Odontoprev business perspectives, projections, operating and financial goals are based on the beliefs and assumptions of company management and on information currently available to Odontoprev. Forward-looking statements are not a guarantee of performance, as they involve risks, uncertainties, and assumptions because they relate to future events and therefore depend on circumstances that may or may not occur. Investors and analysts should understand that overall conditions, industry conditions, and other operating factors could also affect Odontoprev's future results, and therefore could lead to results that materially differ from those expressed in such forward-looking statements. Now, I'll turn the conference over to Jose Roberto Pacheco to begin his presentation. Pacheco, you may begin. Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you very much to be a part of our conference call to talk about the results of the second quarter and first half of 2022. We are Odontoprev, and we're here to talk to you about our performance in such a challenging first half of 2022, but many interesting aspects that we will address here today. Now, to begin our presentation, we have the more recent data from the ANS, where on the right of the slide, we see continuous growth in a younger segment in Brazil, which is dental plans. We will soon celebrate the 30 million members in the industry, which is a huge leap compared to the 7 million that we had back in 2006. So that's very important growth, and we're very confident about the future position of this market that doesn't stop growing. And 2022 is no exception to that. As you can see, since the end of 2020, approximately 3 million new members joined the dental plans in the country. On the next slide, we'd like to highlight the main players in the industry. So on the top, spearheading the healthcare plans, our direct controller, Bradesco Saúde, with approximately 32 billion in revenues, very much higher than the other players mentioned. I'm sorry, he is mute. We cannot hear the original audio. And here on the next slide, We can see the main players now, specifically in the dental plans segment, where the company accounts for 2 billion BRL in revenue, compared to lower levels in revenues of the other players. Now on the next slide, we can see continuous growth of revenues after the harsh impacts that we had in the first half of 2020 that were brought on by the pandemic. And since then, the company has continuously, quarter after 22 years in the market, achieving a volume in revenues which is approximately 12% higher compared to the second quarter of 2020. On this slide, we show the annual variation of revenues, where the company, after the impacts that we mentioned resulting from the pandemic 2020, we've been recovering year after year. And this is an important aspect to explore here, that this revenue recovery was mainly a result of volume and not ticket. The prices have remained stable, and naturally that will change by using the dental plan benefits again. We should have the tickets going back to normal from now on. And here on the next slide, we can see the long-term strategy of the company. So here we're comparing the year of 2014 with more recent data in the past 12 months ending in June this year. So you can see that the company has two major business segments. The traditional one, corporate, with a low barrier of entry, and the average ticket doesn't really go up and down year after year. So we have scale, low costs. So we are definitely the market leaders, having the lowest costs in the industry. And on the other hand, we're innovative and pioneers in increasing company revenues, not only in corporate plans, but also here on the top right, the plans that are mainly for individuals and SMEs, where revenues have been growing 15% every year since 2014. On the next slide, we can see the net additions. They were approximately 170,000 in the last quarter. It accrues over 400,000 new members in the past 12 months, approximately 900,000 new members since the beginning of the pandemic, the peak of the pandemic, in the second half of 2020, with premium rates. So obviously we are adding market share in revenues in the more recent periods. On the next slide, we can see the net additions, not only for the quarter, also for 12 months and 24 months. So we'd like to highlight Bradesco Dental. That's the main incremental brand and accounts for great part of the company's growth. It's worth noting in all market segments, from corporate to SMEs and even into individual plans. So the Bradesco Dental brand is a brand that gets closer to the Odontoprev, considering the share of the 8 billion in the company. 8 million, excuse me. So here we're comparing the dental loss ratio, the dotted line that shows the average of the dental care ratio pre-pandemic average. So the company is at an advantage at lower cost, and that is mainly resulting from the mix effect. So the company has been able to bring in new customers to its business with a higher ticket and lower dental care ratio, as we can see on the next slide. That shows that in each business segment, starting off with corporate, we can already see similar use to the levels closer to the pre-pandemic levels. And on the other hand, you see SMEs and individual plans where together they account for approximately 40% of our revenues. As you can see here, bringing in lower dental care ratio, more competitive dental care ratio. In here on this screen, I would like to highlight the plans for SMEs where the pre-pandemic historical rates were 41%, and now the company presents the dental care ratio lower than 30%. And we believe that the dental care ratio for SMEs is not very likely to go back to the levels that we saw in the pre-pandemic area. Now going on to the next slide, here we have a summary that leads us to record historical records of EBITDA margin. And not only because of a mix of a more competitive dental care ratio in the pre-pandemic period, but also given the dilution of SG&A. So it's also worth noting the bad debt levels is much lower than what we've seen in the past. And that is a result of the increasing bankability, but not only in SME plans, but also individual plans. So the bankalization of those non-corporate segment products is very competitive and difficult to be replicated, leading the company to higher returns that are much higher than the industry average. So as a result of everything that I've mentioned so far, new product mix, dental care ratio is well behaved, the possibility of diluting SG&A, and the possibility of having a competitive expenses framework, as the company has been presenting since 2019, robust cash generation. The average rate of growth was 15%. And from 2019 up to the past 12 months, ended in June, of 32% in LTM. Now, on the last line of the financial statement, or income statement, we see that the company is debt-free and cash position over 800 million BRL. So financial income has been benefiting from actual interest rates in Brazil. And we've been recording quarter after quarter higher financial income. In this specific case, since last year, we've extended our investments profile so we can take advantage of the real interest rates in Brazil. And we've addressed and determined for the upcoming years significant amount of actual interest rates to our portfolio, which was 100% dedicated to government bonds, long-term government bonds. And as a result of what we've been mentioning, the net income increased at a higher speed than cash generation, achieving an ROE in last 12 months of 40%. As we mentioned before, the company's net cash position is 830 million BRL in June. And this is the last part of the presentation. This is the profile of minority shareholders, a free float of 46% with global investors in over 30 countries, and the Brazilian share is 14%. Here are some highlights in ESG. It's highly important for the Odontoprev business model. So starting off with the classification or ranking and in the corporate ESG performance find by ISS from the US. And we also published another annual edition of the sustainability report. And on the bottom, in a pioneer initiative of the company, in international multinational institution called Sea Shepherd, the company's been sponsoring a pioneer project in Brazil along the coast of Brazil, mapping the methodology developed with the Oceanographic Institute of the University of São Paulo about all the waste found. Here on our last slide, we have an agenda of investor relations events, not only in Brazil, but also in Latin America, Europe, and the US. So those were our initial comments. And now we're open to answer your questions. That starts now. Thank you very much, everyone. Now we'll begin the Q&A session. To include your name in the queue, click on the Q&A icon, inform your name and company. When it's your turn, you'll see a pop-up to unmute, and please ask all your questions at once. So first question is from Felipe Amoncio from Itaú BBA. Go ahead, Felipe. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for taking my question. So in this quarter, we saw dental ratios getting close to pre-pandemic era, not only in corporate, but also individuals. But it's taking longer for SME. Could you give us some flavor about why SME takes longer to get back to normal? And when that happens, what should we expect? Should we expect normalization of consolidated DRR? And another question is, how should we consider the impacts of the normalization of DLR to the ticket? Should we consider that a higher ticket moving forward because of that? Thank you. Good morning, Felipe. How are you? Rodrigo speaking. Thank you for your question. Well, about the DLR, as Pacheco mentioned, and you saw that in the 3 charts, we have a scenario that's back to normal. And since the beginning in the corporate segment and individuals that as well, and we like that. We want our members to use the product so they can see value in it. And in SME, I believe that a part of that new level that you're seeing is a result of one of our strategies to segment SMEs. So we have different ranges or brackets. So it goes, according to the ANS, it goes from 3 members to 199 members. And currently we have 3 specific groups in that range of 3 to 199 members. So that goes into coverage, pricing, in addition to an effort to sell, as you mentioned, in selling Bradesco. So we're connected to healthcare. And that explains a part of that SME showing that. So it'd be rare to imagine that corporate went back to normal in its loss ratio, individual as well, and for some mysterious reason, SME didn't. So it's very much related to the strategy that we have in segmentation that goes through coverage and connection in selling with the health plan. And now I'll hand over to Pacheco. But I believe that we have to look at that as a sales effort. In general, we see the market back to normal in the use and in the clinics and in our day-to-day. When you go out, when you're out and about, you see people. It seems like a more stable scenario, post-pandemic scenario. Pacheco? Thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you, Felipe, for your question. I believe that a correct understanding of the DLR is fundamental so we can understand how that's connected to the average ticket. And specifically in the corporate segment, it accounts for 60% of our revenues. And the highest DLR that we've been seeing after the first quarter of 2020, And now it's back to the pre-historical levels or pre-pandemic historical levels. We bring on a more balanced conversation in corporate customers to recover the use, them using the benefit. And that translates into a ticket that if in the first quarters post-pandemic that was negative in corporate, now it can become positive. And that's for 2022, 2023, moving forward. And it's essential to recover revenues. And Felipe, you also mentioned something interesting that is SME. And that's a very specific market segment, as Rodrigo mentioned. It even has the potential of becoming bigger, and it employs more people than the other big corporate accounts. The challenge, though, is distribution. And we have the privilege of having the Bradesco Dental brand as our main brand, dominant brand in distributing to SMEs. And it gives us pricing power. And that translates not only into two-digit robust growth in the first line, in the top line in SMEs, but also with superior profitability compared to our portfolio. So once again, we're very optimistic about SME, and the Bradesco Dental brand, a decisive factor in that. And all things considered, the consolidated DLR of the company is on the right path to be more competitive than the pre-pandemic scenario, the 45, 46%. And will potentially take a while for us to see that. We see DLR lower than the pre-pandemic period. And we have to consider there's a new product mix in the SME plans, and individual plans and banked individual plans are growing expressively. And that's essential for the expectations to return and generate cash for the company. Okay, thank you for your answers. Our next question is from Pedro Lima, BTG Pactual. Go ahead, Pedro. Good morning, Pacheco. Good morning to the team. On our side, we have two questions. The first one is a follow-up from Philippe's question about a lower DLR, especially in SME and individuals. I'd like to know what actually influences that. Is that consumer profile? Is that the ticket? And such as consumers using the network less? And the second question is about CapEx. We saw higher CapEx levels in this quarter, and there's a line of others that brings that up related to revenues. So I'd like to know if you can give us more flavor in that. Thank you. Good morning. Hi, Pedro. Great points. Allow me to start with the second one, CapEx. So it's basically technology, and you've seen that since 2020, Odontoprev practically doubled its investment, and once again, mainly focused on technology. There are many reasons for that. The growth of digitization of processes, the number of robots in the company is much higher than previous years. Today, we have less employees compared to previous years. So technology is absolutely critical for the business. It's part of the Odontoprev DNA. So you should expect levels of approximately 70, 80 million BRL a year. That's the amount of CapEx that we've been seeing. About your first question about DLR, and specifically for the SME plans, in fact, once again, that is a segment that highly interests us. It brings in the pricing power of the distribution channel. So Bradesco Dental brand accounts for over 80% of the amount and the flow of new customers into that profile. And it has different behavior, in fact. It has an important relationship with the Bradesco organization, not only in the service overall, but also, or in dental, but many times connected to health plans and the bank relationship, that the relationship that the bank has with small entrepreneurs. So we're very happy with the results we've had so far. And this addressable market has a very important strategic importance for the company. Okay, thank you, Pacheco. Our next question is from Leandro Bastos from Citi. Leandro, go ahead. Good morning, Rodrigo and Pacheco. Thank you for taking my question. I'd like to address inflation. So first of all, in DLR, today, when you consider your cost per procedure, we know that inflation is everywhere and in medical products as well. So today, how much does the procedure cost increase compared to pre-pandemic levels if it's already capturing higher inflation, or if there's still something that will happen in that sense? Because if the DLR comes back, I don't know if the impact of inflation of the cost, would that be a challenge moving forward? I'd like to hear something about that. And your G&A, you have some agendas on productivity and even been dropping as a percentage of revenues. But what do you see inflationary impact with the levers to offset those effects? That's it. Thank you. Thank you, Leandro. Good morning. I'm going to start off with G&A. So there are a number of projects, and Pacheco mentioned the robots. So just to give you another number, when you talked about structure, as soon as we've incorporated an auto system with all their employees, we had almost 2,300 employees, 2,250, and now we have 1,750. So considering all the synergy systems and having a well-done integration, and we have a good track record in acquisitions, around 11, 12 in its history. So using these new teams and taking advantage of what each of them have to offer. So we went down to 1,750 in personnel. And then you go into the efficiency topic that Pacheco already mentioned. About sales commission, you mentioned dropped a little. That has to do with the mix mainly. And I'll comment on that later, but what we are seeing is that retail isn't fully recovered in dental plan sales compared to pre-pandemic levels. So it's the only quarter that we dropped in members was in the second in 2020 because the stores were closed. But in relation to the sales percentage over revenues, it's mainly related to product mix than actually special terms or conditions. And inflation, what you're seeing today, is already a reality. And DLR is already considering our ability to price, about the negotiation with our dentist network. So as those levels have been normalized since the beginning of the year, that's already the level in that of wrestling, I'd say, that we have between the person who's hiring, the person who's being hired. That's already organized. Pacheco, would you like to add? Leandro mentioned something fundamental, which is understanding cost versus price that we've been seeing in recent years. The fact is that we had deflation, we had lower costs, and that translated into lower tickets. As we just mentioned, the DLR of corporate has been going up. So the frequency is going up. And it's normal for that to come back. And that said, then we think about tickets. So the higher DLR of corporate in that transition of 22, 23, that's basic. So DLR in corporate is already went back to historical records. What's the next step? to see the balance of the contract, and we have one that's great for most of them in the short term. So it's natural to have the ticket going back to the normal levels. And that for the next quarters is once again a very important factor to determine revenues. So once again, if the revenue variation was shy in the past years based on volume, it will no longer be, given the fact that we'll have the expectation of additional volumes, but also there's the pricing power, the traditional pricing power in the corporate segment, and it's natural that that should come back with the frequency coming back to normal in using the benefits. Oh, let me go back to SG&A, Pacheco. You mentioned the robot, you mentioned the structure. I think we could talk about the digitization process where we have the virtual ID for the plan, issuing the payment orders or second payment orders, moving from the older building going into a new building still in the same city. So there are many things that we've been doing and we continue to do, and many of that's a result of technology enabling us to get to those lower levels, right? It's not just one single thing. Many things are playing into that. It's very clear. Thank you very much, and good morning to you all. Next question is from Gustavo Miele from Goldman Sachs. Go ahead. Good morning, Pacheco, Rodrigo. Thank you for the presentation. I have two quick questions on our side. So first of all, I'd like to go back to the SME discussion at a different angle, talking about net adds and not DLR. So the performance stood out, and I'd like to understand if the source of that growth is because of the growth of the market, new customers, or do you see any dynamics in market share gain that's relevant in that specific category? Could you talk about the competition? Do you see that cross-selling in SME in the with the healthcare specific players, is that decreasing? So could you talk about the origin of that faster growth in the SME category? That would be great. That's the first question. And the second point, exploring the Bradesco channel and other points that stood out positively is that an increase of Bradesco's share in the company. So I'd like to understand the economics of that. How does the contribution margin compared to the rest of the portfolio? You already mentioned DLR, but now I'd like to understand in SG&A, do you see a way to dilute selling through that channel? Is it already at an efficient level? Those are the two questions on our side. Thank you very much. Gustavo, thank you very much for your question. I'm going to start off with the competitive environment, then I'll hand over to Pacheco. So about SMEs, you touched on a fundamental point. Just to give you the data. So the record in sales in SME sales was in 2014. And then we exceeded that record by 20% last year. And this year we'll have interesting performance in SME as well. So we have an interesting growth in SME and with the optimism that Pacheco mentioned 2 questions ago. And that, what is that a result of? If we look at the customer base in SME that Bradesco has, is huge. You can see information disclosed by them or even seller. So Bradesco has an important relationship because they give credit or they have payroll, they have the cards and private label. So we have an increasingly more integrated relationship with Bradesco. We have some meetings with the credit committee and also the sales organization at the insurance company, their insurance division, and all the different verticals and insurance that they have together with the bank operation. So I'd say today the game is more harmonious and unified with more intelligence data on the table to make decisions, and regional superintendents that's doing better than the other, and so on. So it's a way for us to get to that final consumer or customer, Bradesco, with all that information. And the result that we see from the past 2 years is that support from the board members that we have here with us, and at a second level in operations and sales, stronger integration as well. So we had record growth in historical SME, and now this year we're going to have a very interesting first half. I think I answered your question about net adds and Bradesco's position in that. And in the competitive environment, we heard many times, oh no, corporate, it's hard to compete with insurers that have health plans. But I'd like to give you some data here. And we always like to say that we're used to that competition. It's not from now. It got tighter with all the IPOs and all of that capital that came in. But we've had that competitive environment forever. The players' names changed, but the environment has existed for a while. And what we see is that the real data in the past 20 quarters in the corporate segment, we were positive in 18 of the last 20 quarters. So once again, that's not new for us in the competitive environment. It's a challenge, and it leads us to consider innovative solutions, new product design, and all the different things that we've been doing. But the concrete data is that 18 quarters of growth. And obviously there's tighter competition, and you've seen a corporate ticket in the past with a lot of pressure. But now, what do we see moving forward? We believe that we'll see how the dynamic is moving forward. So we've had the competition that were merged or acquired, and that's a lot of work. They're large, important, relevant operations, even for Brazil, and the market for everyone. And it's a dynamic and challenge and cultural aspects. And a lot of the growth that was taking place, right, we never stopped growing except for the second quarter 20, and individuals, we are stronger. And what was happening was a dilution because they were buying many healthcare operators and being very aggressive in that. And now I believe that they have a huge task ahead of them. First, decreasing because there was acquisitions of 18 or 16 companies. And now to integrate that brings in the dynamic. And we believe that there will be a market where we can't forget that there will be growth from acquisitions and strong growth. And it's a game we know how to play. We've been in the market for 35 years doing that. And we see that with good eyes. So in the past 2018 quarters that have been positive for us, I believe that speaks for itself. Pacheco? Yeah, Gustavo's mentioning an important aspect about lower acquisition costs when we work with Bradesco Dental in the Bradesco channel. And that's a fact. And particularly in the individual plan segment, as we have the higher commissions, it's important to note that the company is changing its sales profile. 15 years ago, it was practically exclusive for retailers, and now it's balanced out pretty much 50-50 in retail channels and bank channels. So the conclusion is direct. The higher banking lowers the levels of commissions by 1/3 in sales of individual plans. And that's where we have most of the acquisition cost. So higher bankarization that already exists in SME plans, but doesn't exist in the individual plans, but it's halfway there, that really lowers the levels from 30 to 40 down to 10, 15%, which would be more normal that we see not only in the great brokers segment, but also the banks, the partners of the company and shareholders of the company. Gustav, I'd like to add something else when I talked about the structure of SG&A, just to give you a metric. We had 3.5 members per employee. Now we have 4.8. So that's growth of 40%. And that shows that in our internal exercise of looking for that efficiency all the time. So that's also important data to show that there was an effort. And yes, DLR did drop during the pandemic. Now it's coming back, but we're always working on looking for more efficiency. Thank you. Thank you, Rodrigo and Pacheco. Everything's very clear. Thank you. Next question is from Gustavo Tizeo from Bank of America. Good morning, Pacheco and Rodrigo. How are you doing? We also have 2 questions on our side. First of all, you've mentioned this a lot already, but we'd like to understand the timing on price increases in corporate. When you talk to them, to have that logic that they're going to look back to the last 12 months and then a drop in the short term, but with a higher calculation for next year, or given that DLR is already back to 50%, does it make sense to continue to look at a ticket that's going to increase? And the second one is about Odonto System. Based on the individual plans, you've been developing a great strategy. So I'd like to understand if that is a movement to decrease churn. So someone that was going in, that was in a higher ticket going down to a lower ticket because you rolled it out to other Odonto System regions, or given the difference in target audience, that doesn't happen in there with the other individual plans. Okay, Gustavo, thank you for your question. The first one, I'll start off with the Odonto System. Yeah, the rollout is we're still working on that. Nothing new there. We're still enrolling dentists, and it's like you mentioned, it's a different product. It has excellent quality, but it's the first product to access, different than the Odontoprev brand, which is more premium. And for that, we had to continue to build a different network, right? And after that, like the chicken and the egg, so you have to have a customer that's going to use it, but they'll use it if they have the network. And that's in parallel to that. And it's been being done all over Brazil slowly. And by winning new customers that will enable us not only to have these entry products, and then we can upgrade afterwards, like you mentioned, to robust products with methodology of scheduling and control that we have at Odonto, that we have that's different than Odonto System. What was your first question? Price increases. As Pacheco mentioned, in the pandemic, DLR was very low in the beginning. And I'm talking about medical plans mainly, even because everything was closed down, right? And then in dental, so medical plans would come back. Even if things weren't going to be done, people would do them later. So that's very important. 15% of what we pay of DLR can be postponed, but in urgency or emergency, if you had an accident and you broke your tooth, it has to be treated immediately. Orthodontics, you get maintenance once a month. If they stop for 4 months, they're not going to do that 4 times in one single month, right? They're not going, that won't be recovered. So we don't have like a time, it's not a time bomb. So it stopped because of the pandemic and I need a prosthetic. I'm going to get that in 4 months from now. That would happen in medical, right? But for us, that doesn't happen. And so when we had very low DLR in dental, obviously the companies took advantage of that in negotiating the tickets, right? They took advantage of that because their revenues were affected given the economy in general. And as us and as the health plans were benefiting from lower DLR, but now that's over with. And as you can see in the frequency in healthcare, life is back to normal. So moving forward, using the pandemic to negotiate differentiated rates is over because now things are back to normal. Pacheco? Yeah, that's the idea. Gustavo brought in an interesting point about the ticket. If it was negative in 2020 and beginning of 2021, now in the past 2 quarters, you've seen positive tickets, and that's the trend. It reflects the use in 12 months, and it reflects a higher DLR in corporate. So the equation is direct. So higher in DLR, well, actually what we're going to see in corporate is we're going to see a ticket that doesn't go down. Okay, perfect. Thank you. That was clear. Thank you for your answers. To ask a question, click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen and inform your name and company. We have no further questions. The Q&A session is now over. I'd like to hand over to Pacheco for his final comments. I would like to thank everyone for participating in one of our other events with the first call in the healthcare segment. Have a great day. Thank you. Good morning to you all.